Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between. With me, your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back to the Underwater Podcast. And this week, I'm featuring an interview I did way back in April with surf and fine art photographer Lucas Murnaghan. Lucas is based in Toronto, and as you'll hear in the interview, he runs a surf shop on the edge of Lake Ontario, where there's a decent surfing community. Lucas talks about shooting surf photos in the lake and further afield, and how he started to include male portraiture into his work. We chat about the business of fine art photography, directing male models, and how being gay might change the lens through which your work is viewed. I also wanted to take a moment this week to give a huge thanks to my listeners. Your feedback makes this show so easy to do each week, and I just love knowing that it makes even a small difference to your creative lives. In fact, I want to read out one review that really stuck with me this week from Julia Lehman in Philadelphia. She wrote, "I just wanted to give you a shout out to say thank you for creating this podcast to inspire fellow underwater photographers and models. I've been shooting underwater portraits myself for 8 years and I'm excited to hear everyone's stories. I can relate on so many levels and feel a little lonely as an underwater photographer here in Philadelphia, PA, since I'm the only one here shooting underwater, as far as I know. I look forward to connecting with you and others on Facebook. You rock, and keep up the awesome work." Thank you, Julia. Hopefully you feel a little less lonely when you hear the podcast. I know I feel a little better every week being able to connect with you all. Okay, let's dive into the episode. Lucas, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brett. It's a pleasure to be here or there or wherever we are.
Virtually, yeah. How is it up in Toronto? Are you actually on the water in Toronto there?
I mean, Toronto is on the water. I'm not directly on the water, but yeah, it's still cool here. I mean, April is not yet summer or spring, I should say. Some buds are starting to come out, but no, it's still chilly. We even had some flakes overnight and some blowing snow today.
Oh, nice. So it's kind of still crisp and kind of lively up there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, considering our current world situation, it's not the worst time of year to have to spend extra time inside.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I'm in California, in LA, and it's been quarantine weather for me. So it's been pretty much grey and raining.
Okay.
Which is perfect.
That's nice that it's cooperating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How is the quarantine and the kind of COVID situation up there? Are you guys stuck indoors? Is Toronto kind of on lockdown, or what's the situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's always hard to compare and contrast other people's, kind of what it feels like for them versus what it feels like here. I mean, I'd say Canada has been under some kind of modification now for about 4 weeks, and though each province has been doing it a little bit differently, there has been some kind of a cohesive plan from the federal level. Schools are closed, non-essential businesses are closed. People are being certainly strongly encouraged to spend as much time inside as possible. People are allowed to go out if they wanted to go for a walk, if they wanted to obviously go get groceries, that kind of thing. But yeah, nobody whose work is considered non-essential, all those people are really being asked to stay put.
Yeah. So is it quite quiet in the city there at the moment?
Yeah, it's kind of nice in some ways. I feel like now that we're kind of entering our 4th week, people are kind of taking their foot off the gas a little bit. Like we were driving today to drop off a couple online orders from our shop, and there just seemed to be a few more people out and about. I think it's just, people can't stay put for too long. So.
Yeah. I mean, once you get to that ending screen of Netflix where you've watched the entire thing, I think right. You have to leave the house.
Yes. When I was a kid, I used to get excited when I finished video games. But yeah, when I realized that we'd finished Netflix, that wasn't as satisfying.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if there was a big boss at the end of that or not. Yeah. So how has the quarantine restricted you working at all? Has it kind of closed up a market?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the underwater photography for each of us plays a different role in our lives. It is a component of what I do. It is certainly something that I do professionally and something that I enjoy, some modicum of success with, but it isn't my lifeblood. It isn't the thing that if I had to stop, that I have to figure out, how I'm going to pay the mortgage or pay the rent. We have lots of other things on the go. We have a little small business here. So that's where we've been focusing our energy. So no, but at the same time, I can't see any practical way that I would be shooting right now. Most of my work right now would be either in indoor pools, which are all closed, or I'd be
Right.
traveling to shoot, which is also not a viable option. So yeah, I think I haven't been shooting, and I don't think I could be shooting over the last month.
Right. Is there other things in? I know you've got your store and you've got some other kind of revenue streams. Is
hmm
there photography work that you could be doing, like post production or pre planning any shoots that might be coming up?
Yeah, I'm trying to use it. I've had a bit of a bumpy year health wise, and this, it's funny. I was just kind of coming out of that as this happened to the rest of the world. So it was like I felt like I was just gaining a little bit of steam, and then the bottom dropped out. But I mean, there's no good time for a pandemic, so I can't imagine that. It's hard to feel too personally, slighted by it. So yeah, I'd say I was on a bit of a ramp back up stage, and starting to find a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of creative juices starting to flow. And so I've
Yeah.
tried to use this as as a planning moment. I've spent a lot of time going back and looking at earlier work, and interestingly seeing my own stuff through a different set of eyes, because I think my world has shifted, as has everyone's. So
Mhm.
it's been a really fun time to go back through some hard drives and look at some things, and either images that I didn't like before I now like, or images that I saw in a certain way before I now interpret completely differently. And that's been, I guess, kind of an interesting retrospective to do, and has fueled some ideas moving forward.
Oh, that's great. I think it's always good to go back through your work, even if you get to see how you've evolved over a certain amount of time. And I think this whole COVID thing is doing that to a lot of us photographers, or even just creatives in general. I think this is someone's hit the pause button for us, and we have to kind of make the most of this time. And if we don't come out of this kind of changed in some way, I think it's almost not been worth the time sitting around, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of saying it. I mean, it's hard to say that it would be a wasted opportunity, but there is really, it is an opportunity to go back and do some things that you've been meaning to do. And I've always known that going back and looking through previous work was an important part of anyone's process, and certainly been advised that it's something that I should do. But I could never do it without just kind of getting down on myself and looking at it and being like, geez, you didn't know what you were doing here, or look what you did with that. And boy, wouldn't it be
Right.
nice if you'd known then what you know now? But I think I'm being a little kinder to myself, a little gentler. And maybe that's just it's a time for empathy outwards. And maybe that empathy is kind of, I'm churning it on myself a little bit too, and being a little kinder with what I'm looking at, and how I'm feeling about it.
Oh, that's really interesting. Like kind of giving yourself a bit of a pass and kind of
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
softer
and
glove, I guess.
I think we have to right now. I mean, I think if you're hard on yourself now, it's hard to make it through the day. So I think, yeah, I think as an artist, it's an interesting time to use that, some of those positive energies towards your own work or your own trajectory.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like just seeing on social media and kind of Facebook and stuff that not even just photographers, but people in general who are kind of taking this time to either learn a new skill, or they're doing their yoga every day, or they're like baking. It seems like everyone's kind of been forced into kind of looking after their lives a little bit more than just the usual grind of getting up and doing that same thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely. I think I've seen some quarantine bingo cards where you can tick off all of the stations that may
Yeah.
seem to be moving through, including cleaning out junk drawers and baking bread and doing yoga and all just kind of things that you say that you'd like to have more time for. And yeah, and I think trying to figure out what to do with that professionally. And I've watched some other photographers really crank up their ask for, oh, hey, I've got these prints. I'd really like you to buy them. This would be a
Mm.
really good time to support artists. But I think it's really hard because, everyone is on a different arc with this. And I avoid using the word curve because that kind of implies,
Yeah.
something statistical or epidemiology or public health. But, each of us are on our own arc in terms of our handling of this, our stages of grief, our however you want to call it. And you don't know where someone else is on their arc. And it's funny how there's certain asks that I received or certain emails or even ads that have popped up that just seemed so tone deaf or so, bordering on inappropriate. And then another
Yeah.
week later, I'm like, oh, I see what they're doing. That's totally cool. And they were doing the same thing. I wasn't ready to receive it in the way that they thought they were putting it out, the week prior. And so I think as artists, it's hard to kind of say, oh yeah, support me when everybody needs support right now. There's not a single person who isn't affected by this in some way. Not everyone is financially affected because lots of people are still working. Some businesses in some strange way are benefiting from this if they are in the telecommunications or software that actually is helping a lot of these kinds of things, maybe similar to like what we're doing right now. But yeah, I think everyone's taken a hit here.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, let's just let's take it back a bit. Let's go back to what you were saying about looking back through your old work.
Mm-hmm.
And can you give us a kind of an idea how you started in underwater? What was your trajectory there? What was
Yeah,
your arc?
yeah, sure. So my photography really started when I got into surf photography. I had a camera when I was a kid and did all the usual things but never fancied myself as really knowing much about anything. And somewhere around Instagram kind of started around the same time as I started to get interested in taking pictures from the water. So in water surf photography, as opposed to that long lens on the beach, but actually
Yeah.
bobbing around out there with the housing. And that's, I actually learned how to take proper photographs from the water, and any dry land photography that I've done since then, it's kind of with the lessons that I've learned from the water. And I think it's kind of a backwards way to go about it, but it's an interesting medium to start in. And I really enjoyed surf photography. I was my partner is a keen surfer, and it was a way for us to kind of meet on a common ground because I could never keep up with him as a surfer. I just wasn't any good. And so
Right.
it turned out that if I really enjoyed taking photographs of either him surfing or other surfing or big days, then we would have a shared
Yeah, interest there.
shared interest and a shared level of desire. When it was crowded or when it was big, those would be days that I would shy away and I would want to have, just really, beginner waves with nobody else out there. And that was kind of boring for him. And so it allowed us to kind of align a little bit better. And I got, I was lucky to start taking some photos here on the Great Lakes, which is a whole kind of subculture of surfing, which is, surfing with the wind swell here on Lake Ontario and Lake Huron.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you about that because I was looking, my geography is terrible. So I looked up where Toronto is,
Yeah.
knowing that you own like kind of a surf themed
Yeah.
store. And I'm like, hang on, you're on a lake. Where does the surfing happen?
Yeah, it's a funny thing, lake surfing. So it's, most swell that happens, is related to storms that are far, far away, and it leads to this ground swell that, travels thousands of miles, and that's where you get those pristine waves that, hit the North Shore of Hawaii in the wintertime. If you get a windy enough day on a big enough lake, it can, much like a snowball rolling down a hill, as it crosses the lake, it can build up momentum to the point that we get quite impressive surfable waves in the right spot at the right time.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's a whole, if surfers are already misfits, this is definitely, misfits of a misfit sport.
Right.
And we just, and we get to kind of, in that we started a surf company and shop here that we're somewhat of a meeting place or a community hub for what is a pretty amazing community.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds incredible that you're on a lake and you own a surf shop.
Yeah, it's
And that there
either
is this culture around it as well.
yeah, it's either a very bad idea or a very good idea. It's probably nowhere in between, and the jury's probably still out. But yeah, it was through that I was able to maybe progress with my photography a little bit faster because there was a pretty ready audience that was interested. There weren't other photographers in the water because there weren't that many surfers in the water, so I wasn't
Mm.
there at pipe trying to line up behind 6 or 7 established professional photographers trying to get a shot. People were happy because I was the only guy that had a housing that could jump and was willing to jump in the lake when it was as cold as it is when we surf here.
Okay.
Oh, I mean, we surf here right through the winter, so it'll be below freezing, and we'll be in the water. The nice thing is, as long as the water's liquid, it's at least above freezing. So, but
Yeah,
we'll
true.
be in the water when it's in Celsius, it would be 2 or 3 degrees. So
Right.
in
Yeah.
Fahrenheit, I guess that would be in the 30s. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty wild concept. So if you've ever seen those kind of ice beards or icicles hanging down off people's faces, that's usually a lake surfer 9 times out of 10. But and I cut my teeth a little bit on lake surf photography, and then when I got to the ocean, I was like, well, this is much nicer, this is much warmer, the waves are much bigger, the lighting's much better, because we're surfing on days where the sun's actually out, we're surfing on days where the day isn't actually just 8 hours long like it is in the winter here. So water clarity was up, the ability of surfers went up, they stopped wearing wetsuits, so they were a bit more photogenic because they didn't look like
Mm-hmm.
all of these anonymous penguins that photographing cold water surfers can do.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that,
Head to toe in neoprene and
yeah, it's really, and if you're trying to grab focus, somebody dressed in all black and moving on a overcast day through murky water, my hit rate
yeah.
was not very high when I
No.
was starting out. I am very comfortable saying. But yeah, I got to start shooting in other parts of the world. So took the what I had learned to trips to New Zealand and Australia, to Brazil, to California, to Hawaii, to Barbados, among a few other places. And that's where I started to kind of get to shoot some bigger waves, some better surfers, and still not really. No one was particularly interested in my work really at that time, but I was at least being physically challenged by it and being able to
Mm.
be in places that I never imagined I would be.
And were they personal trips, or was that something to do with your work, or how did that work?
Yeah, I mean those were really personal trips at that time. I mean, we were
Yeah.
starting this surf brand, and we had kind of ideas about how these would work together, and certainly the photography was serving that purpose, but it was certainly wasn't making any money, and it wasn't funding any of the equipment that I was buying or anything like that. It
Right.
was just I just figured, and I was really conflicted about this at the beginning with surf photography, because you sometimes would get these either kind of funny looks, or you'd get somebody who just ask you kind of directly. They're like, well, like, why are you out here? Like, is anyone paying you to do this? And I used to
Right.
get really insecure about that. I would just be like, yeah, why am I out here? I mean, is this weird that I'm out here?
Yeah.
And then one day I was just like, well, why wouldn't I just ask the surfer the same question? Like, why are you out here? Is anyone paying you to be out here?
Yeah.
Did anyone pay for your flight to come here? Did anybody pay for your board? You seem to be enjoying yourself. I'm enjoying myself taking photos. So maybe it's okay to sink a little money into a hobby and go places. I mean, if people can go on ski trips or golf trips or other things like that, I mean, why couldn't I go on photography trips?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's
that's
how
the
I
fun
had
of
to
it.
reconcile it myself. But I mean, it was funny that there was a little moment where I was like, well, yeah, what? This is weird. Why am I out here? And then I was like, no,
Right.
this is. I'm okay. I'm okay.
And so, what sort of time frame are we talking? How long ago was this?
That would have been, for a span of about kind of 3 years, about 3 years ago. So 6 years ago, for about kind of 3 years, I was doing that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And so then where to go from there? Because I mean, you're known
Yeah.
for underwater male athletic kind of art sort of
Yeah.
shots.
Yeah.
How
I
did you
guess
go from surf to that?
yeah, I guess it's who was it? I think it might have been Miles Davis or another great musician said it took him a long time to figure out how to play like himself, or to, to play the song his way or something like that. And I really, he worded it much better than that, but I heard it the other day and I kind of said, because what we try is we try to take photos like other people. We try to take, you see something and you're like, oh, I should try to take a photo like that. Or
Yeah.
I was trying to get my work, accepted by a magazine, or maybe a brand would be interested. And I even had a chance to go shoot, a couple of WSL, pro competitions down in Barbados. And I just was like, I wasn't getting any love. It was kind of like this unrequited desire for validation or acceptance. And yeah, I really found myself trying to take photos that I thought other people wanted to see. And in retrospect, if I was giving advice to myself 3 years ago, I would say, well, that's never going to work. Like, why would you be doing that? But at the time, I didn't know any better, and it seemed like a reasonable thing to do. I had just actually come back from Barbados, shooting down at Soup Bowl, in a pro competition. It was November, and it was, I can't remember why it was. Oh, actually, it was my partner was going to be having elective back surgery, like nothing too,
Right.
it's still back surgery, but nothing too, serious. But I knew we were going to be grounded for a little bit. Like, we weren't going
Right.
anywhere. We weren't going on any big trips. And I just wanted, and I was kind of coming to this realization that as a, surf photographer in Toronto, I was unlikely to ever reach any level with this that I was going to be happy with. I'm a pretty competitive guy. I'm pretty goal driven in other aspects of my life. And so
Hmm.
I'm sure there was a part of me that was like, are you really going to settle for kind of just being sort of okay at this? And if you can't ever have access to the best conditions, the best light, the best riders, I just wasn't feeling like I was kind of, creating what I wanted to be creating.
Right.
And
Because you weren't in the right environment to be your best.
yeah, I guess so. And so I kind of just started to get creative and thought, like, well, how could I shoot more? I just loved being in the water. I mean, it was
Mm.
that's a common thread, I'm sure, for all of us, is that's my happy place. I mean, when I'm in the
Yeah.
water, I go back to all the things I felt when I was a kid. I feel creative. It's on all levels, and probably can't even be overstated how much that's the driver for me, is just being out there shooting, and now under there shooting
Yeah.
is why I do it. And the product is it's almost a byproduct, because the actual satisfaction and joy comes from the process of the gathering, not in what is gathered.
Yeah. It's
So
almost that resulting photo is kind of secondary to the experience
yeah,
of
I mean,
being under the
yeah,
water.
and I would say probably more so in the beginning, because maybe what I was actually, creating wasn't living up to my mind's eye. But I don't think I really had a mind's eye. I don't think I really, and that was, looking back, I didn't have an image in mind that I was trying to capture. I was just capturing what was happening. I
Yeah.
was I was a documentarian. I was a bit of a bystander that just happened. Maybe I was capturing what was happening in front of me, but I wasn't going out there that day and saying, okay, I see. So the sun's going to be rising here, and I know that this water will do this, and I know if I shoot, at this f-stop, then the sun's going to flare. And this, but these are the things that I know now, but I wasn't then, and
Yeah.
and
You were
and
just being reactive rather than trying to
yeah, reactive
use what
versus
you had.
being, proactive in terms of that. And so, back to your original, kind of questioning about how, where it shifted, I would say, that winter, I just wanted to shoot more. And so I reached out to, I think in one day, I reached out to two different groups. I reached out to the head coach of our university swim team here in Toronto, and a LGBT water polo club that I had actually, played a few games with, or had, done some practices a couple of years ago, because I used to play water polo back in high school, and
Yeah.
just said to both of them, hey, here's some of my surf stuff. I'd love to come and, take some photos of you guys, in practice sometime. Would that be okay? And, within 24 hours, both of them had gotten back to me with an enthusiastic yes. And so there, I think 3 days later, I was, in one practice and then in the other. And
Great.
that's where it shifted into the pool, and that's where it shifted. But even there, I was still doing over unders. I didn't have the shots in mind yet. It was just like, oh, and then I kind of slipped underwater and I started to go, oh, this is cool. Oh, look what a fisheye does underwater. Oh, look what a
Oh,
rectilinear wide angle lens does underwater.
yeah.
Look
So
at
at
these.
that point, you hadn't even really gone fully under. You were still kind of at the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what I was. I still, because really, I hadn't done any underwater stuff with any of my surf because I'd never been in a Indonesia or Fiji or somebody or even Hawaii. In
With the
good
clear
clear,
water
yeah, in
and
good clear water.
yeah.
So every shot I took underwater just looked cloudy and
Yeah.
it may have given a cool distortion to the bottom half of the frame, but it was never what we would consider to be a good underwater photo by our current or at least I should say for myself by my current standards. So yeah, so
And
it was the pool that and it was those two sports teams that helped me move from kind of above water to underwater.
and did you find that you were still, when you were dealing with those teams, were you still kind of documentarian, or were you starting to kind of control the action as well? Like, were you starting to direct?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Brett. It was certainly for the first, 3 or 4. That's probably what I did was kind of maybe 3 practices with each of them, and it was very much capturing what was going on. Partly because I was trying to be a fly on the wall and not interfere with their practice. And
Yeah.
this was a competitive swim team that had a couple Olympians on their roster, and I didn't. It wasn't for me to say, even though I had a head coach that was like, what do you need them to do? Do you want should we do some stuff off the blocks? Do you want them all to go in at the same time? And I was just like, I don't know. And
Too
I
many
was,
things.
yeah, just clumsily trying to just not screw up and figure out how to stay down, how to, because I hadn't worn a weight belt before when I was doing the stuff above, because the idea when you're doing surf photography is to not go underwater. You try to stay on the surface.
Yeah,
So
for survival.
this was a whole different kind of, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to weight myself to get down there. And so, yeah, it was doing that. And yeah, something in my head was like, yeah, this is cool, but I'm still just taking pictures of swimmers swimming. I'm taking pictures of water polo players playing water polo. This is I'm not creating anything. I'm just once again I'm capturing, and I'm getting some cool angles. Like I'm seeing this. I'm showing people this world from a perspective they perhaps haven't seen it before. But it wasn't. There's nothing emotional about it. There was when I look back at those images, I don't go ooh. I maybe some that more the architecture of the pool was captured and the swimmers were really moved to minor characters in the frame. I think those shots when it was swimmers, I look back at those and I really like them. But any kind of in close shot of someone swimming from an underwater perspective is a bit of an awkward angle, at least to my aesthetic and to my eye. And
Yeah.
it was only when I say got up the nerve, because that's what it took back then to say to, one of the swimmers that I thought might say yes. I said, hey, if I could find a pool where like it's just you and I in the pool and we can start to kind of try some stuff that isn't just in practice, would you want to try that? And I was looking back, it's so funny about how afraid I was to ask that question. And I kind of understand now why I was so afraid, but it's funny to think how easy it is to ask that question now and how hard it was then.
And is that just because of a confidence in your own work?
Yeah, I think it was probably more than that. I think it was, not knowing what it was that I wanted to create. And even looking back at that first day shooting with him, all we did was take pictures of him swimming in an empty pool, but at least we didn't have those distracting elements like lane ropes or somebody else with a flutter board or mismatching, bathing suits or other people in the frame or those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was becoming more pure in that sense. But to be honest, it was because I was having to reconcile the fact that I thought that he looked really good underwater. Like I thought he looked really beautiful. And that was my own personal, as a gay man, I was like, oh, I'm a bit, not conflicted, but I'm like, okay, but is it okay for me to want to photograph him because I know that what he looks like and he looks good? And can I combine that with my, professional life outside of that, which for me is being a doctor and working at a hospital. And the other part of that is, taking photos and kind of saying, what is the role of somebody like that in that situation? So that was a real kind of moment of reckoning or reconciliation or something that I had to process in order to figure out the kind of photography that I now feel so comfortable doing.
And so, I mean, that's a very interesting point where you're a gay man and you're taking pictures of good looking men under the water, and how that changes into your private life or into your your working life. Do you think there's a a disconnect or a correlation with society in terms of men taking pictures of beautiful women and men taking pictures of beautiful men? Is there some kind of disconnect there?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting area, and one that I'm not sure that I fully have my head wrapped around. But I have friends that have, one of my close friends actually said something about, we were talking about my work, and he's been super supportive. He's one of the first people that I shot and got to kind of try saying, well, what if you do this? What if you do that? And he was a gamer. He was like, yeah, sure, we'll try that. So I would say he was one of my early models or subjects. But even a year later or 2 years later, when it was coming to, putting out my work and putting up a show and putting out a book, he said something about my work being gay, like that the photography was gay. And then I kind of said, well, is the photography gay? Like, are the images gay? Like,
is it gay just because I'm gay?
Yeah. And so if a woman was taking a picture of a woman, would that art be considered, lesbian? Is it, but if people said, oh, but no, but she's married, so she's straight, so the work's not lesbian. You're like, well, hang on a second. What is it that what are we talking about? Like, is it, we're talking about we're placing men in a unconventional position, both in the sense that they're in an underwater environment, which obviously is foreign to a lot of the poses and direction that I'm giving them. But I'm also trying to tap into a softer side, a level of vulnerability, maybe some roles that are typically considered, masculine or heteronormative. But, if my model's straight and the photographer's gay and it's just one guy in a photo, is it a gay photograph? Is it,
Yeah.
But that's a whole other, that's probably a whole other podcast. But I find that very, very interesting, where someone's work is placed based on what you know or you think you know about the artist, even if the work itself doesn't necessarily go there. Because I'm very cognizant of that line with as I'm sure many of us are, who do a lot of work where the model might be nude, semi-nude, or some line in between. It's very easy to, even when you go through your shots, you kind of look at something and you're like, ooh, like that's crossed that line. We didn't try to cross that line, but there's just something about that pose that's a little more, maybe we'll use the word lurid, or it's more erotic than it is emotional. And we're going to kind of say we're not going to keep that one. We're going to go more for this one where there's something being a little bit held back. And that's where my line is, right? Like that's what that's the one I dance around, and somebody else is going to say, oh no, my line's over here, or no, I don't have a line, or no, I can't even get anywhere close to that other image. And maybe that's where I was back then, is as a gay man, could I ask this attractive male model, who was either gay or straight, I didn't know, if he was willing to do a photo shoot with me, where I was choosing him to do that photo shoot because I knew that he was aesthetically pleasing. And maybe it's because I haven't come at this, like I said, all my training was in, sciences and medical school, and no one I wasn't brought up in this idea of, fashion photography or other, even other realms where the aesthetics of the individual that was the reason everybody was there. I mean, of course, like that's why a model's a model. That's why this is on the cover. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing that. But I was having to reconcile that coming from maybe a different kind of headspace.
Oh, totally. And I think what you're saying is these are questions that photographers are asking themselves. I think when in their early days, if they start doing these kind of, more art, more nude kind of photography, and regardless of the subject's kind of sexual orientation or the photographer's sexual orientation, I think these questions need to be asked of yourself. Is this okay? Is this going to cross a line? And if that line is there, is it just my line, or is it a line that everyone shouldn't cross? Like
Yeah.
it's such a universal kind of thing, and regardless of whether you're shooting with men or with women, I think that's still a question that should be coming up.
Oh no, absolutely. And I when I shot my first nude subject, it was a funny situation because we were, I think, having lunch, and we realized we were staying at the same hotel in Palm Springs, which just happened to be a clothing optional hotel. And I said, "Oh, but it's got a great pool. Let's do a photo shoot." But we didn't. It wasn't a. We didn't say, like, I wasn't even thinking. I literally had shot like this swimmer, at the university like 5 days before this. I hadn't figured out what the hell I was doing yet. And he just like drops his shorts and jumps in the pool. And I was like, oh, I guess this is what we're doing. Okay. I guess I'll just keep shooting. And he had done a lot of photo shoots. He was very comfortable, and he kind of told me what his parameters were. And I was like, okay. But now I'm like, okay, what the hell do I do with these photos? Like, I'm like, am I going to post just a butt cheek, right? But I'm like, can I post a butt cheek? Like, can I do that? And what, that was that was an interesting, looking back, it seems comical, but at the time it certainly didn't feel like it.
But I think that's a very interesting thing because looking at your work now, you're obviously not shy of shooting that style of photography. How long did it sort of take you to kind of realize that posting a picture of a butt cheek was fine?
Yeah, I'd probably just posting the first picture of the butt cheek, and then kind of going, because I'm not a prude about nudity, myself. And I don't think growing up I was taught to be overly prudish about it. It was a very much like we weren't going to, nudist colonies or clothing optional beaches or that kind of thing. But the idea of just like quickly changing your shorts, behind a tree was kind of, that's what we did. And maybe that's because you had, there was 4 kids, and it was just too much of a hassle to be overly precious about these things. But yeah, and I've never kind of felt too hung up about my own body or about other people's bodies, but it was more the moment I did that, I was putting myself out there as much as an artist as he was as a subject. I wasn't nude, but I was saying something about not necessarily my sexuality, but where I was willing to go with my work. And I was ready for whatever assumptions or interpretations that somebody wanted to make about that. And that, looking back, was a very big step.
Oh, yeah, definitely, I think. And so along those kind of lines, as a photographer myself, I work a lot with women. It's not particularly by choice. It's just because the style of work that I do, I think, is more interesting to women. It's more fantasy. It's more kind of, fantastical sort of stuff. So when I do get to work with males, I don't really know how to direct them. It's a very different style of direction from shooting with a woman. I know what a woman looks good doing, whereas a man, and I am one, I should know how men look. I'm not very confident in knowing how to direct a male to pose. Do you think that that's something that came along for you, or is it something you already knew?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess it's where I'm using my own personal aesthetic, my own personal assessment of what I think looks good, and sometimes as in that looks good, as in that's well composed. His face doesn't look strained. I like his hand position. I like how all that kind of stuff. But then
Yeah.
there's the other part of me that's just like, oh, that actually shows him off well. Now, not necessarily one of my least favorite subjects or my least favorite categories of subjects to shoot are professional models, because they have some preconceived notion of how they look best and how they want to pose and
Right.
what I'm going to need from them. My absolute favorite subjects to shoot are dancers, because they understand their body position better than anyone and can take cues. Even if you just come up to the surface and we say, hey, just a little bit here and a little bit, just a little more extended here and a little more flexed here, and you just go right back down, and it's like boom. They're not afraid to be nude a lot of the time, because they're very used to dancing around quite scantily clad, or changing on the in the wings or in the studio or something like that. And then I would say my equal to them are people who have done absolutely no photo shoots before. They have no preconceived notion of what looks good or what they should be doing. And one of my most the term muse, we sometimes use it a little bit jokingly, sometimes there are, but he's definitely been one of my go-tos. And I said to him once, I said, how is it, like, I look, every frame I take of you, I look through, and the only ones that I don't like are where I screwed something up. But
Oh, right.
you always look perfect. Like, how do you always, how is, like, why is that? And he's just like, well, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so I don't do anything. And I was just like,
Yeah.
perfect.
So he's not overthinking or
I
anything.
need more people to do nothing or to do less, because less is more. And I think that's one of my principles. It's not true for everyone. I think sometimes more is more. If what you're going for is that grand image that looks, there's a complexity to its composition, to how the subject is dressed, how they're lit, how their body position. If it were to be stripped down, it wouldn't be the image that you or someone else had in mind. Every once in a while, I kind of stumble into something that looks like that, but usually my stuff is more, I would say, I try to go for that, remove, less, minimalist, and let there be two or three things that the eye can see, and then the rest is to the imagination as to why they're there.
I think that's totally true. And what drew me to your work in the first place, I think, was the minimal nature of it. It was very, I'm coming from let's put as much fabric in the water as we can kind of.
But that's what I love about your work, right? I mean, that's what's, and we've talked about lighting before, through Instagram DMs, and, that's like your signature, right? Whereas like I'm just not smart enough to use light that well, or technically savvy enough to know how to get it all to sync up the way I want it to. So I'm just looking for available light because it's all I know how to use. And so sometimes sometimes your limitations are your greatest strength. And if you can figure out how to harness those things, then go with it, right? And if you can't figure it out, then figure something else out, and then that will become your strength. But I guess I was lucky enough that I had a limited enough toolbox in the beginning, and that included access to pools, access to models. So I learned to be a scavenger. I learned to be to cajole individuals that, you want to try this seems reasonable, and was able to develop enough of a body of work and stumbled onto something at the level that I could show something to a prospective subject and say, hey, would you like to try a photo like this? And they would be like, yeah, that looks cool. But like the first guy that I said, would you like to try a photo like I don't know what it is that I want to do? Those are the guys that I have to go back and be like, I owe you an incredible debt of gratitude, because they took a chance on an idea that I don't even know what it was. They were just, much like me, though, they were as happy to be part of the process because they really liked playing around with it, because they were water babies too. They just liked to be in the water. And so even if nothing good came out of it, they were like, well, that was a fun way to spend an afternoon, which is, obviously something that not all photo shoots turn into, but a lot of underwater photo shoots do.
And I think we find each other as well. I think in terms of like muses and models and sort of clients even who really push us to create bigger and better stuff. I think we end up kind of gravitating towards each other because of that love of water. It kind of drags us towards each other.
Yeah, no, I think it's and what you think is going to be the shot, what you have in mind, sometimes you're right, but if you're open to seeing or hearing or at least, trying what it is that the other person is bringing, to the shoot or to the, I do a lot of pre-shoot work, and a lot of that is prep work, is in terms of building that relationship. So I'm often a big fan of doing like a face-to-face meet, like a coffee, or at least a phone call, and then often we'll do some kind of dry land shoot to kind of just so that I start to understand I understand their ability to take direction. They understand what it is that I'm after. I can get a sense of what their body looks like, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and then, and maybe only then, do we jump in the water. And of course, I've had other people where it's just like, well, we happen to be in Hawaii. There happens to be, this crystal clear water. Why don't we both jump in and see what we get? And
Yeah.
sometimes that's a great photo. And then other people, you do that and you're like, yep, not everybody should do underwater photography,
Yeah.
which we've all experienced for sure.
Absolutely. And so talk to me about your business itself in terms of photography. Are you coming at it from a fine art point of view, where you're kind of taking photos that you're bankrolling and then selling them as prints, or have you got clients coming in who are paying you to
Yeah.
shoot with you, and then they're getting the resulting prints?
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, that's a great distinction, or not. Distinction is the wrong word, but there's different models, right? There's different ways to do this in a financially viable way, and I have mad respect for people that do it differently than I do, because I probably, if I could, I would, and I just can't, and so I don't, and I do it another way. And I think it was because I wasn't dependent on the outcome of the photographs financially. That wasn't what was going to pay the rent, or pay for groceries that week, and so I could afford to just kind of sit on them, and
Yeah.
I say sit on them. I threw so much stuff up on Instagram, and in retrospect, I wish I had held back a little bit more. But at the same time, that's when I was going through my rise, and I probably wouldn't have gone through that if I wasn't being as active, and putting in the algorithm was kind of working that way then, for
Yeah.
me. And so you can't kind of look back and say, oh, I wish I'd done this differently, because who knows what would have happened, right? So
Why do you think you should have held back on some stuff? Was there things that you wanted to kind of keep in reserve for something else, or?
Oh yeah, I think it just would have made, coming out with, shows and books a little bit easier, because there was a lot of good stuff that once
Yeah.
it kind of seen the light of day, even through social media, it loses a certain shine.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, but at the same time, I needed to be shooting that much and producing that much and sharing that much in order to learn as much as I did, because it really was a 2 year. It was bordering on manic in terms of how much I was shooting. And for somebody who didn't have a pool, for somebody who
Yeah.
didn't live by the ocean, how I was kind of gathering and doing as much as I was doing. And through that, of course, figuring out what it was that I wanted to say, or what my artistic voice was, or what my aesthetic was. It only comes through just producing, right? And producing doesn't necessarily mean publishing or selling. It means just shooting. Like,
It doesn't even necessarily have to be good. It's just
sometimes
practicing.
it's sometimes better when it's not, but it's nice when every once in a while one of them is okay,
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've been approached by a few different, commercial opportunities. And of course, when they first came along, I jumped at them, because I was like, are you serious? You want to send me product and you want to pay me to, oh yeah, that'd be amazing. Oh, that'll be
Right.
easy. No problem. Like fish
Yeah.
in a barrel, like easy. And I would take on those things. First of all, I didn't really know how to take on, a professional client well. I didn't know how to, have a contract, or I didn't know what the correct language was. I had no idea what, kind of how to budget it, or what numbers I should be pitching to them. So I'm not sure if I left money on the table, or took more than I deserved, or
Yeah.
what, but I certainly didn't feel like I knew what the hell I was doing.
And what sort of clients were they? Were they brands or what
Yeah,
sort of
mostly.
thing?
Yeah. So I've certainly had the, would you take an underwater portrait of me? What's your rate? Because I didn't have ready access to a location, I found the logistics of doing those ones challenging. And
Yeah.
it's, and I think I also recognized that part of where my work was going was as much about how perfect the location was, maybe people, body types and inclusivity and all that kind of stuff is a whole other conversation, but definitely people were liking a certain aesthetic of the guys that I was shooting. And that's where fantasy came from for me. Like you talk about fantasy through makeup or through hair or through fabrics or through light. Part of the fantastical part of my imagery, even in their simplicity, is in the either otherworldly or unachievable level of fitness or body type or whatever, to whatever ideal, whether it's Greek or Romanesque or contemporary. It doesn't really matter. There was some agreement that this was not a horrible looking individual, and that there was some benefit to there being an aesthetically pleasing subject creating an aesthetically pleasing image. And I struggle with that a lot because, and I'm sure you face this and others, when people say, well, it'd be nice if you took photos of more normal looking people or more average people, or is this the only type of person that you think is attractive? And I really, that it hurts, like, and it hurts probably because I, on some level, I struggle with that. But I think it's a little bit like if someone likes taking pictures of cars, like they're a car photographer. Do we begrudge them if they only take pictures of classic cars or supercars, or everything's shiny and perfect? Or should a car photographer be taking pictures of all cars?
Yeah, I think people don't realize how much the subject itself infers the photographer's skill. That's maybe a bad way of wording it, but I mean, I get those questions all the time, and for me, it's like, why don't you take pictures of men more often?
Hmm.
One of those reasons is because I don't get many men offering,
Mm-hmm.
but the other reason is that I don't think I'm as good as shooting men as I am at women, because
Yeah.
I know what I'm looking for with the female body. I know what's going to work. Whereas with men, I haven't kind of learnt that language. And I think it's the same thing with architecture. I could, I know how to use a camera,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think I'd look at architecture the same way as an architectural photographer would, to be able to get the kind of the soul in those shots. I think it's, not everyone is a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, and I think we're, when they say to a writer, what should I write about? It's I'll write about what you know. If you're an artist, you should be creating from a place of what you know. You don't have to just put out there everything that you know, but what the art that you create is informed by who you are. And if you're not using everything that you are to create the whatever form of art you're creating, whether it's music, whether it's photography, whether it's painting, whether it's sculpture, then you're selling yourself short, and you're selling your audience short,
Yeah.
and you're losing the opportunity to distinguish yourself from others. Because the only way that you can be sure that your work is going to be distinguished from others is if you pour all of you into it, because nobody else can do that. Nobody else is you, and therefore nobody else's work can be like yours, because they don't have you to pour into their work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So
Everything you do is flavored by yourself.
yeah,
Like
it's
you're
it's
experiencing
literally
through
the
a light.
lens that you see the world through. And for it's a bit of an obvious analogy for a photographer, but it's like, yeah, that's how I see things, and therefore this is what I portray. And a lot of my work is autobiographical, and so for me to shoot more female subjects, I'm not necessarily, I don't know their story. I don't know where their emotions, their pains, their challenges. I know what my challenges have been, and I know what kind of unresolved or trigger points or emotions that I'm trying to convey. And I'm the subject is the clay, or is the the medium's not the right word, but it's how I'm telling my story, because I can't take photos of myself. Some people do really cool self-portrait stuff that works in that way, but I mean, I didn't even know my work was autobiographical until one of my good friends, who's an incredible photographer, he said that to me once, and he was like, "Oh, I love how you can say so much about yourself through your work." And I was like, what do you mean? I'm taking
Right.
pictures of other people. And he's like, yeah, but you're telling them what to do, and you're choosing the images that convey this, that, and the other thing. It's like, oh, is that what I'm
Yeah.
doing? Oh
Yeah.
shit, that's what I'm doing. Oh, okay, I'm going to keep doing that.
Well, it's
So,
definitely working. So
well,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's so I think that's where the male subject thing comes for me too, is that I kind of understand it's not necessarily their story, but there is a synchronicity, there is a share, and maybe that comes through those pre-shoot consultations. It's like, where is the meeting point for us? What have been the chapters of your life? Here's a little bit about the chapters of my life. Where do those pages line up? And let's use those moments to create something together.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Along that vein, so thinking about people's experiences and them flavoring their work, are there people that influence you, or people that you really look towards and get excited about seeing their new work?
Yeah, I would say there are a number of artists that I respect and love, partly because I feel like I've learned about there's a couple I've learned we'll call it their audacity, or their willingness to pour themselves into the work that they create. So I think, Tom Bianchi and Robert Mapplethorpe would be two contemporary examples of that. These are two guys that just kind of were willing to I don't say they didn't give a fuck, but they just said, like, this is my world and this is what I'm doing. And if they're incredible artists and they're going to put their work out there. And I guess I loved their bravado and their fearlessness to do that, and so I've always respected that. There's a couple, water photographers on the surf side that I've really always enjoyed their work. Water photographers like Ray Collins, Australian. He's What I love about him, not only is his story and how how art has kind of come into his life, and I often refer to coming into the art world through the side door, and I think he did the same thing. And the reality, of course, is once you've been at it for a while, you realize that there actually is no front door, and everyone comes in through the side door. But
Right. Yeah.
but it feels a bit like an imposter syndrome at the beginning. But you
Yeah.
then realize that you're using all that stuff to create what you're creating. But he's just one of those artists that I love looking at his work and saying, when someone's really found something when you see an image and immediately that it's his, without ever having to look for his name at the bottom of the page. Or if you see something that you think is his and it's not, you kind of go, but
Where's that influence come from?
yeah, but I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But his work, I'm tremendously inspired by, and I'm also inspired by his generosity and selflessness. That I reached out to him, and he just was one of those guys that just like, yeah, sure, what's your question, and at one point it was about technical stuff about housing, and another time it was about, I think, sponsorship, and then another time it was about putting out my first book. And every time he was just like, here's what I tried, here's what I did. And this is what worked for me. This is what didn't work for me. Take it or leave it, but it's here on the table for you. And that's not always the answer that you get from people. And so I just have incredible respect and love for people who are able to be so confident in their work that they can share so unabashedly.
Yeah, and so humbly just kind of let it go.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
share their experiences, which totally brings me to kind of the end of this interview, which is, it's been so awesome just to listen to your experiences and your kind of point of views on this whole crazy genre that we've kind of stuck ourselves into.
Yeah, I mean, I love any good conversation with somebody where there's some shared understanding and there's some overlap, but it's like a Venn diagram, right? Like we're you and I and whoever else might be listening to this, we're our own circles, right? Everything is inside, but there is some little point of overlap with you and I have a point of overlap, which may be narrow or it may be big. We don't really know until we start exploring that. And maybe it's as interesting to find out what else is in your circle as there is to find out what is the zone of our overlap, right? And so, but sometimes it's that starting point, it's that common thread that can get you there. So yeah, when you asked me to do this, I was just like, sure. I don't know what it's about, and it doesn't really matter because it sounds interesting, and I respect you as an artist, and I respect the work that you're doing, and so I just, whatever I could do to be a part of something you're working on sounded great.
Well, you've added to it already, so I think this whole podcast situation is just a whole heap of dots, circles, and they're all kind of starting to line up, and I think you've added to that really nicely.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So thanks, Lucas. It's been awesome having you on here. And I'm going to let you go back to your lake surfing.
Thanks very much, Brett. I appreciate the opportunity. And I hope that your spring and summer come smoothly in California.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I'll speak to you soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you like the podcast, please subscribe. If you'd like to connect with us or just learn more about my guests, you can hit our website at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram or Facebook. Also check out our regular live streams on YouTube. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to know more about my underwater photography workshops and mentoring, you can find me at brettstanley.com. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.